Hello and welcome again to AP World History. My name is Jason Epand. This is class number 7. Class number 7. Last class we finished our chapter on Persia and we went through China's classical age as we discussed Confucianism and Taoism and legalism. I also want to make it clear that a lot of famous poets came from this age. This really was China's classical age when it came to their own cultural development. The famous book, The Art of War by Sun Tzu, also came out during this era, the classical age. We also finished the Qin Dynasty, Qin Dynasty, and thus we are at the moment now when there's a new dynasty taking hold of China. And that dynasty is the Han Dynasty. China likes to call themselves sometimes the Han people or the Han race. And this is the Han Dynasty. Now, by 206 of the Common Era, a guy by the name of Liu Bang, L-I-U Bang, B-A-N-G, restored order, and he is considered to be the first Han emperor. Liu Bang wasn't particularly charismatic and he wasn't particularly talented. He just had the right people by him, and these people, along with Liu's sort of, you would say, steady leadership, provided for the reunification of China under the Han. Now, the Han really seek to find some type of middle ground between the ultra centralization and the ultra stiff rigidness of the Qin dynasty and the looseness and the too decentralized Zhou dynasty, Z-H-O-U, Zhou dynasty. And that was one of their main goals. Probably the Han Empire peaked with a ruler by the name of Han Wudi, W-U-D-I, Han Wudi, who ruled from 141 to 87 BCE. He is known as the martial emperor, and he very much advocated a certain amount of centralization and also expansion. And that expansion is going to cause problems for the Han dynasty in the future, and we'll talk about that momentarily. But first of all, I want you to understand what the Han dynasty did. It established a land register by dividing the empire into multiple administrative units. They also completed, I'm not saying it was the world's first census, but in 2 CE they completed a real elaborate census which placed the Chinese population, at least what they calculate, the areas that they used, as being 60 million people. The Han are responsible for building an enormous bureaucracy to rule the empire. They built lots of roads and canals. They levied plenty of taxes on agriculture, trade, and craft to make sure that the government's coffers were always well adorned. A couple of specific aspects of the Han. First of all, like the Shang in the past, the Han ruled by giving themselves, meaning the empire and certain members of the aristocracy, absolute monopolies over iron and salt. Iron and salt, and those are two very different, very precious commodities within a society. And when you have, that's how they establish control very much, is that they're responsible for, and they kept track of who is getting what amount of those two things. Another very important aspect of the Han that becomes very influential in later Chinese dynasties like the Tang and the Ming is that they created the Confucian educational system. The Confucian educational system, which was set in place so that those individuals who received a very high score on the annual civil service exam, those people are the ones who are going to make their way up to the Chinese bureaucracy. So you may say, why is the bureaucracy so large? It's so large as to encourage people to be educated in the Zhou Han classics, or whatever it was that the Han wanted its citizens, or I should say its top citizens, to know and to espouse. Okay? The civil service exam, the Confucian system, it does benefit even though everyone has the opportunity to become a member of the Junshi, the Junzi, superior individuals, and thus part of the government, really, I would say that the odds were stacked in the favor of the rich and the wealthy. Why? Because the rich and the wealthy could afford to purchase a great deal of assistance for their children, whereas the poor, the kids had to learn for themselves. They had to fend for themselves. They had to be more self-sufficient. sufficient, okay? So the idea of, I know in Korean it's called hagwon, the idea of a private academy really comes from this Confucian system where children of families that can afford to receive assistance or to pay for assistance send their children to these academies so that they can learn all that is required to be learned and do better on the civil service exam, basically outcompete those who don't go to private academies. Another aspect of the Han Dynasty is that they were very interested in imperial expansion. As I mentioned before, it was very common for Chinese emperors to make sure that all of the agricultural surpluses that the majority of people, the peasantry, are providing go to the army, so that the army can go outside of the Middle Kingdom, outside China, and perhaps expand its territories. They successfully did so in Korea. A great deal of territory that Korea formerly owned in today what is called Manchuria, I think it's still called Manchuria. Anyways, a great deal of that territory Korea used to own, China sort of took that from them, and there was a whole historical saga, which some of you may be familiar with and how they got that. Another country which China often battled with is Vietnam. And Vietnam was quite good at keeping a certain amount of independence from Han China and from the future Chinese dynasties. They fought vigorously hard to maintain this independence, and this is a topic I'm going to get back to later on. I believe it's chapter 15 when I start discussing the variety of other areas within Asia. What you need to know is that the Han really did, especially during the early parts of its dynasty, enjoy uncontested hegemony or dominance over East and Central Asia. They were very successful at subduing the Xiongnu territory, which are sort of Xiongnu territory that's found in, you would say, closer to Western China and people like that. In fact, these are the people who I believe today are the Chinese Muslims, the Uyghurs. Again, my pronunciation, I apologize. Uyghur. These are the people sort of in, you would say, Western China who have an Islamic background, who are Islamic, but still live in the country of China. And often in the news we hear about certain, fights that break out between these Xiongnu people and the Chinese government. Okay, anyways. So that gives you an idea of sort of the political situation in the Han Dynasty. Let's talk about the economic prosperity, all right, during this time. There is no doubt whatsoever that during the early Han Dynasty and as the Silk Roads begin to kick in, which we'll be talking about later in chapter 12, okay, that the Han Dynasty is enjoying really an immense amount of prosperity. The majority of people are cultivators, but there's all different types of new farming tools and harvesting tools due to the fact that iron is now spread out throughout China. Again, it's controlled by the very top, but obviously they're allowing the peasants and the farmers to have access to it so that they provide for better harvests, etc., etc. Something else that the Han Dynasty is known for is when sericulture or silk weaving, silk products are becoming an enormous economy and source of revenue for China, especially because people from all over the world would like to have some of these products. Something else that the Han were responsible for, that obviously is I guess you would say key to life for everyone today, is that the Han are responsible for replacing bamboo, replacing silk as writing material, and bringing in paper. That's right, the Chinese, you could say, invented paper, all right? No more bamboo, no more silk. Now we're writing on, you would say, I get the bark of wood. Isn't paper wood? I think so. I think it is. Anyways, and so as we know, it's very prosperous during this time. Unfortunately, for the Han, times are always not going to be good. And why is that? Well, what happens is that because the Han are they're so obsessed with the idea of expansion that a great deal of their treasury is spent in trying to you would say, obtain more land for itself. Well, this is a problem because what happens is that the Chinese government is soon going to run out of money. And when they run out of money, what do they need to do? They need to raise taxes. And they do. They start raising taxes on some of China's some of their most wealthy families. All right, and not only are they raising taxes, but sometimes the government is just outright taking land from these people as well to help, provide food and to provide a source of revenue for the emperor's continual usage, be it for expansion or other means. Okay? Well, the wealthy and the aristocracy they're not going to take this well. They're not taking this well. I mean, you imagine these people have a big head and a big ego as it is, and then there's somebody a little bit higher than